Welcome to the Live Well, Perform Better podcast. My name is David Duggan and I'm the director of Below the Line, an Irish-based consultancy specialising in helping people, teams and organisations raise their levels of consciousness, inner potential and performance. I am part of a team made up of experts from the worlds of business, elite sport, adventure and health and well-being. We are coaches, mentors and advisors to some of the world's biggest companies and organisations, as well as smaller businesses, entrepreneurs and people looking to make their mark in the world. Our guiding mantra at Below the Line is live well, perform better. What does that mean, you might ask? Good question. Maybe the easiest way to describe it from our perspective is finding the formula that works for you when it comes to things like looking after your physical and mental health, running your business, developing your career, leading your people, or simply being able to show up as brilliantly as possible into your own life, both for yourself and those around you. That's why each week I sit down with a member of our team or an invited guest for a conversation that focuses on the question, what do the words live well, perform better mean to you? This question is a way into exploring with people from a range of different backgrounds, industries and disciplines. What are the practices, techniques, habits or ideas that they use to help them to show up and be at their best in all areas of their lives? Whether that's as CEOs, leaders or managers, or as parents, family members or friends. We keep it short and sweet so that you can extract all the good stuff and get on with the rest of your day and hopefully put some of our knowledge, experience and expertise into play for yourself. For our first episode back, I am delighted to have been joined by Bernard Jackman. Bernard is someone that would be well known to many people as a well-loved and respected rugby player for Ireland and Leinster, Connacht and the Sale Sharks, a coach for teams including FC Grenoble and the Cardiff Dragons, as well as a writer, broadcaster and pundit in Irish, UK and French media. I invited him onto the podcast to talk a little bit about rugby, but a lot more about his own personal story, what he has learned from making a series of pivots in his life and career, and how he is bringing his knowledge and passion for the game of rugby to new contexts as a broadcaster, speaker and consultant. This was a fascinating discussion with someone who has a real passion for leadership and culture in sporting and business organisations, who has been up close and personal with some of the most respected business and sporting leaders in the world, and who relishes new challenges and taking them head on, thanks to an appetite for hard work and a really positive and optimistic outlook and mindset. You can subscribe at www.belowtheline.ie, where you can stay up to date with our podcast, as well as our exclusive online events and sessions, including our Press Pause coaching community. Thanks for listening, and now, on with the show. Well, first of all, let me just welcome you, Bernard, and thanks very much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I know how time poor you are and busy you are, so I do appreciate you giving me a bit of your time. And for people who are listening to this, I thought I might just preface the conversation by saying, obviously, you and I don't know each other, but we connected probably about 5 or 6 months ago on LinkedIn. And obviously, I started getting some of your posts in my feed. And one of those posts was about the fact that you were talking about making the transition from coaching to doing media work and all that entailed. And I reached out to you. I said, look, would you be interested in coming on the podcast? I think that's an interesting angle for people to maybe just to get to know you a little bit better and to approach this idea of making pivots and transitions. And I was saying to you at the time, because obviously you went from being a player to being a coach, to now doing this. And you said, well, actually, there's probably about 4 or 5 or maybe 5 or 6 transitions that are and pivots that I've made. And you mentioned the fact that, look, I was studying marketing in Japanese, and I went from that and kind of yanked the handbrake on that and went into a playing career. So I thought maybe we could start with this idea of, do you feel that you're naturally wired to make pivots or transitions, or do you think it's a result of the nature of a career in sport?
Well, I think, look, obviously sport is a highly volatile career, and you always have to think about the next step. But I think I'm pretty intuition is something that I rely on quite a bit, and not feel that I'm stuck in a certain career or trend. And it's been since I left school. Like my father's a cattle dealer. I'm the eldest boy. He'd love me to be at home with him, and I really enjoyed that career as well. But probably, I went to college to do international marketing in Japanese. the economy was struggling at the time. You know, I wanted to be quite specific or quite unique in my skill set. So picked something that there wasn't many opportunities for other students to do. So I think there was 25 in our class, and there was a high drop off rate. So it was a new skill set to have in Ireland. I was about to go to Japan for my third year in college, and rugby went professional. Warren Gatlin was a Connacht coach. He offered me a contract, and I had this choice because rugby, like the RFU, actually voted no to professional rugby. So the RFU went into it, you know, kicking, screaming, and it wasn't a safe career to go into. So I was risking jeopardizing, you know, a decent degree to become a professional rugby player. And even Warren Gatlin himself said, "Look, this might only last a year, and I might go back to being an amateur." But I felt it was a great opportunity, so I did transfer into business studies at DCU. So I ended up combining being a pro player with a BA in business. Then I went to Sale Sharks for 2 years. Then I came back and I didn't have a contract. I got a job as a medical rep, so I was a pharmaceutical rep for AstraZeneca. Then I got a contract again, and went back into pro rugby and ended up finishing up at 34, having won a European Cup with Leinster. Then I went back to study, wrote a book, and an opportunity came to go to France to coach. Went for a year, stayed for 5. Then went to Wales. Warren Gatlin rang me again, said, "Look, there's a job in Wales." Went there and then came back and you know, decided to pivot again and get out of pro coaching because from a family point of view, it wasn't really where we wanted to be. Got a job in the corporate world, worked for a company called Refinitiv, which is Thomson Reuters, selling market data. Did that for 2 years. Then Gartner approached me. Gartner are a big multinational research and advisory firm. Went working for them for a year. But at the same time, I was kind of working in the media, and thankfully things were I was getting more work, and there was more opportunities because of TV contracts, etc. More TV, rugby on TV. I got a column in the Sun Independent, a couple of podcasts. So yeah, I basically made the decision. And so I was also doing some keynote speaking as well. So basically made a decision last September to leave that 9 to 5 security and go freelance and do what I pick and choose what I do and only do things I like. And that doesn't say anything against the jobs I had, but you know, sometimes in a multinational or a corporate job, you know, I certainly found that it wasn't all things I liked, you know what I mean? So I decided that I want to just do things I like and enjoy, and hopefully that'll help me perform better and give better value. So that's how I ended to it. But again, there's no big plan, and that's probably, if you sit down with your career advisor in TY year, you know, they tell you the importance of a plan. I've always kind of gone with my gut feeling and just tried to do things I enjoy. And it's worked out okay so far.
Yeah. But you're clearly an adaptable person, in terms of your mindset. Like I love that idea of, you know, I didn't have a contract, so I went, you know, there's a grafter in you, who doesn't kind of sit around, and looks for opportunity, it would seem.
Yeah, look, I back myself to work. I know
Yeah.
I can work. I don't mind work. I like work. I like working. So no, I wouldn't. Yeah, there's a work ethic there, which probably I got from my family. But yeah, no, for sure. I that doesn't fear me, to be honest. You know what I mean? I think there's opportunities there, and I would say that look, there's a lot of things I don't know, but I'm pretty good at implementing the things I do know, and hopefully there's going to be always a need for that.
So it would seem to me that making change it's not difficult for you, but it's almost, thinking back to last September, you know, it was just about, you know, committing to something and going for it.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, I feel a bit of a fraud because it wasn't like I was leaving a job and going home and waiting on Monday morning for the phone to ring. I had built up, you know, a steady stream of engagements that I knew were going to last, and particularly with the World Cup, you know, in France in September, you know, rugby is going to be, you know, pretty popular in the limelight for the next 12 months at least. So, you know, there was an opportunity in that. But yeah, it's obviously a risk, you know, giving up the security of, you know, a 9 to 5 or a salary job to go freelance. But It's something that, whatever, it's January now, so I'm 5 months into it. Six Nations is starting. There's lots of. I'm working tomorrow in the Viva for RT Leinster Racing. I have a column to write after this for Sunday's paper. So yeah, no, things are going well, thank God.
Great, fantastic. I love to hear those stories, and you're right. It's interesting. Lots of people talk about this idea of leaving a 9 to 5 job and kind of ripping the band-aid off or pulling the handbrake. But even in my own experience, having worked somewhere else and then started a business, you never just jump. You build stuff up. You've got connections. It's never how would I describe it? It's always a calculated move, I think.
I think look, unless you've been let go, and I was in the Dragons, then obviously it's out of your control a little bit. But again, the important thing then is not to panic and just talk to good people. Look at your network, look at what you want to do, and see it as an opportunity to try something different.
Yeah. You mentioned there just the coaching roles and stuff like that. I'm always curious to know, how do people make that transition? Speaking of pivots from player to coach, what lessons do you think you've learned from that?
Yeah, look, I think that's obviously not as big a pivot as it is to go from coaching into tech sales, but because it's what but you don't really know, because what you've experienced. So, for example, a coach comes in on Monday morning to do his or her review. You get what they're telling you or showing you, but you don't understand the thought process, discussions they've had in the staff room with the other coaches to actually break that game down. So that was a shock, to have to work out, well, how do I get the best possible message to the players? How do I deliver that message? Whether it's through my oral communication, my body language, the clips I use, the keynote or the PowerPoint slides, whether I team it, is it aligned to our overall way of playing, etc., etc. So that was all, and then I was doing it in a language that I didn't speak, and I was sitting in team meetings. I was like, the problem as a coach, sorry, not the problem, the challenge as a coach is you're effectively in the building from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m, which isn't a big deal, but it's it's 10% of your time is actually dealing with players. 90% of your time is planning, reviewing, building up, working with other coaches. As you become more higher up the food chain as a coach, it's media, it's agents, it's the board, it's finance. So it's a totally different challenge. And for my first year, because I did German in school and Japanese in college, I did no French, and the staff room was totally French. The only time they would say something to me in English was if they needed me to do something for them. So I was sitting in meetings for 2 or 3 hours, unless there was footage involved, being clueless to what they were talking about, and there was no need for them to translate because I was only a defense coach. But that was great for me, because it made me pick up French much quicker than I would have if I was just a foreign player playing in a French team, because unfortunately a lot of the French foreign players hang around together, and they pick up French much slower. So that was interesting. So but that made it easier for me then to transfer into a corporate job, because I was used to being in an office all day, bar that hour where you're on the pitch. And that's what I think a lot of ex-players struggle with, is going from the dressing room into an office. That's a big culture shock,
Yeah. And you mentioned there, relatively speaking, that's an easy transition from playing to coaching. But you mentioned tech sales, for example. So yeah, just talk to me a little bit more about what's the challenges associated with going from playing or coaching into the corporate world.
Well, to be honest, it actually, I was very lucky. The book companies I was with had very good onboarding, and then you just gotta, so for example, look, it's the same in any sales job. You have to understand your products. You have to understand how they work, the key benefits, why it can help the customer with their issues, and be able to then, I suppose, understand what the customer needs. Where's that pain point, and you do that through your line of questioning. But also you need to have a passion for for that industry and to be keeping up to date and you know, start to read. So for example, in Refinitiv, you know, I started to read the Financial Times, you know, listen to podcasts, because that's where you could understand where the market was going and understand the challenges on a macro level. Gartner, you know, is an IT research and advisory firm, so I had to start understanding digital transformation, understand, you know, data, how big financial service companies are going to go through a data transformation. So yeah, so I think you have to live it. You have to have a passion for it, and if you don't have a passion for it, you have to try and create one. But look at it, the great thing I liked about sales was, David, is that you're getting constant feedback through numbers or results as to how you're tracking. And to be honest, that's something from a playing and a coaching point of view. Effectively, you start Monday, you know, from scratch. You start Monday with a clean sheet. You find out how your week has been. And in sales, okay, some of the sales cycles they're not as quick as 7 days, but at least you're getting that feedback through performance or results that can help you get better, or motivate you, or reward you financially, or whatever you're chasing. So I like that side of it, you know.
Yeah, fantastic. People in business, you know, they're really interested in my experience, in bringing the lessons of elite sport or high performance sport into their organizations. Do you think there are transferable things that can be applied from sport to business, or is that just is that BS?
No, absolutely. And I 2010, when I retired, I went back and did a master's in UCD and did a MSc in sports and exercise management. I did my thesis on the topic was the correlation between high performance behavior and sport and business. So I felt I'd been in a high performance environment in Leinster, Ireland. We won a Grand Slam. I'd also been in low performing environments, you know, at times in Leinster, and I wanted to kind of see were those behaviors and values, was that culture transferable. So I went to Toyota in Japan, Toyota factory, one of the two in Tokyo. I went to Amazon in Seattle. I went to the IMG Tennis Academy in Florida. I went to Man United. I went to Dyson. I went to Just Eat. I went to Rolex. And I just literally observed and asked questions and spoke to C-suite, and tried to find out, you know, are they successful because of luck, you know, or is there core behaviors and values and systems in place? And I found that basically there is, you know, there's a reason why these teams are successful, and it's not the same in each place, okay, but there's core fundamentals, whether that's, you know, very strong leadership, whether that's you know, in Dyson, for example, you know, you've got some of the best creative minds around trying to build new things and create new products, and you know, Rolex is this legacy about, you know, passing on a piece of jewelry that, you know, will last for your lifetime plus your son or daughter's lifetime. You know, Toyota's obviously high production quality, you know, computerization, but also really strong on the feedback area, you know, and incorporating feedback of the employees. Red Bull Formula One, likewise. So look, at there's lessons you can learn. I wouldn't, and I think, you know, I speak to companies about performance now, and I think I'm quite lucky if I haven't spent 3 years in the corporate world. As I said, my visits to companies for my studies, my sporting, I think there's a mix of everything. I don't think, you know, because I certainly get this, because I work with some multinationals, some leadership teams, and, you know, like being motivated to play for Dublin in the All Ireland, or to play for, you know, Munster or Leinster. When you go into a rugby dressing room, pretty much everyone is very happy to be there, right? Everyone is very focused on maximizing their career because they know it's short term. Most of them are playing for where they're from, etc., etc. Whereas in a corporate environment, you can have a mix of people with lots of different backgrounds, lots of different senses of purpose, lots of different challenges, lots of different ideas about how things should work. So I think the corporate world is the harder thing to get right, but you can definitely learn lessons from other businesses. And, you know, some of the things that sport do, military do, you know, the best performers in arts do, to try and find, you know, the best best process and the best way
Yeah.
forward.
I'm often struck by as well. I think I was talking to somebody else last week who was relaying to me a conversation with the next rugby player. Um, I can't remember who it was, but basically saying, slightly contradicting you in one sense, saying I don't know if there's much that from sport that I can bring into business, except, which I think was a pivotal and a key point, was how I prepare myself and how I manage myself. And that for me was like, oh yeah, Jeannie Mac, like that's a gold nugget now, in terms of how athletes prepare themselves. And there's lots of reasons for that, like it's a finite career and all that type of stuff. But I think there's huge lessons that people can take from how individual athletes prepare and look after themselves and mind themselves in order to be able to perform well, that I think it has absolute application to business, all sorts of areas of life. Would you agree with that?
No, for sure. And look at the best sports teams are trying to learn from elite business performers and other areas, because that's what elite people do. They're like magpies. They're looking for ways to get better. And you said, yeah, sometimes the gold is unknown. People don't realize why they're special. I look horse racing. I've got to meet AP McCoy, Ruby Walsh, etc. And it's only when you ask them questions, that the answers they give you gives you unique insight into why they were superstars or why they were elite. But for them, it's just the way they are. You know what I mean? It's just the way they are. They learned to pick it up from other elite performers, or it was how they're brought up. But there is there's lessons we can learn from everybody that can help us get better. But it has to be something that's that fits in with your skill set, your strengths, your way of seeing things as well. And that's the hard part, is not to try and chase every fad. Is to just work out, what fits in with your operating way, the way you do things, or the way you're suited. So are you a morning person? Are you someone who likes, you know, very direct feedback, or do you need it sugar coated? And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. It's just how we are.
Yeah. Can you think of an example that really stood out for you as something like?
Yeah, look, I think look at the most impressive guy I came across was Ferguson, Alex Ferguson. I'm a United fan, but like he was so clear in what was important to him and how Man United should operate, and he said himself he wasn't the best technical or tactical coach, but they had three simple behaviors that basically he hammered every day, and he hired or fired on, which were like, United player never gives up. United players are brave, not just physically, but also in terms of choice to make, and then team first. And he literally, wasn't afraid. So Eric Cantona, jumped into the crowd and kung fu kicked someone, but he didn't sack him because he felt he was very, very strong in those three areas. But he was willing to sell David Beckham because he felt he wasn't putting the team first, before he sold him. So, and that's he was able to, he was willing to make very hard decisions based around his values, and it became very transparent, very clear for his staff and players, and it led to sustainable success. And that's, I think there's other methods that can maybe get you a bounce in performance, but it's not sustainable. So that's why I liked him, because he over the long period of time he was able to recreate that environment that led to success.
Yeah, fantastic. And back to some of that stuff we were talking about around how you prepare yourself and things like that. I'm always curious with people who are on the guests of this podcast. What are there any daily, weekly, monthly habits, rituals you engage in to help you just show up and do what you're doing now?
Yeah, look, I'm very lucky now. I'm working the performance, leadership, and rugby analysis. So the three things that I'm absolute, like, I love anyway. So I've got a bookcase behind me here full of those type of books. So I would read those for pleasure, and like I listen to podcasts. I just on Twitter, a lot of people I follow are in that space. So I'm constantly, I'm really passionate about those areas. So, for example, I'm doing the match tomorrow. With Leinster playing Racing. A lot of the some of my media outlets that I follow or listen to podcasts are French rugby based, right? So if I do that out of interest. So if I wasn't that way inclined, I would have to spend this week prepping, trying to find out what's happening in French rugby, why are Racing having a tough when he gets there. What's the staff going to be? What's the player movement going to be like? Who's leaving, who's off contract, etc. So I kind of the lessons I've learned is to just live it. Just to throw yourself into that space rather than have to try and do a crash course. And likewise, I'm like, because of the whole leadership thing, I'm constantly looking for examples of really strong leadership that's current. For example, the New Zealand Prime Minister, she's resigning this week because it's been very difficult for her to have a good family life with the pressure and criticism she's been under. But yes, if you've watched her over the last 2 or 3 years, she stood up and tried to lead in the best possible way she could, and it was very impressive under massive pressure in terms of how she looked from the outside. And I think it's what I really enjoy about what her is that the easy thing to do is crack on. It's to stay there. The hard thing to do is walk away from that job. But she's made a decision, which I think is a brave decision for her and her family. So there's constantly, if you're in that space and you're inquisitive, the current affairs gives you lots of great examples of leadership as well. But as I said, I'm naturally inquisitive. I enjoy kind of trying to be up to date, trying to understand why certain people are doing things. Like even Pep Guardiola, I don't know if you're a soccer fan, but Man City won 4-2 last night. He gave a brilliant post-match interview. He was booed off his team were booed off the field at halftime, and he just spoke, I would say very similar to how he would have spoke to his players, and there's lessons in that. So yeah, my advice is, and it's so stupid, it's so simple as stupid, is literally be really interested in the things you're doing for your job. It's like you for this podcast. You obviously picked up on something I posted, and that's generally what high performers are, is that they live and breathe it. So my dad lives and breathes cattle. You know what I mean? If you take the conversation away from price of cattle, the grass growing, the feed prices, etc., he loses interest. But that's fine. That's what he's big into.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, even if reflecting on what you've said to me, everything you said to me so far, what I'm hearing is someone who goes with their gut, but is very attuned to that, and isn't, is much more interested in living this stuff as opposed to intellectualizing it. Not that you don't intellectualize it, you're feeding your brain all the time. But for me, it's almost like you're plugging into, well, this is what I love to do. This isn't work. This is just, this is what fascinates me. But I'm living it, as opposed to just thinking about it.
Yeah, and I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky because, like, from a rugby point of view, right? Because I'm working in TV and podcasts and written journalism. I'm getting to still be at the coalface of elite rugby, right? Even though it's not from a coaching point of view. I'm in a coaching group of coaches all over the world who are all. I'm the only one not pro coach anymore. But there's information being shared there, which I really find fascinating, and hopefully helps me be a better pundit for my leadership and my performance talks. Like, I'm working with companies like Airbnb, Porsche UK, Aviva, Standard Life, Diageo, etc. And then, but I'm working with small companies, small family businesses, and like there's not a talk I don't go to, or a workshop that I deliver that I don't come away kind of understanding a different part of a different business or a sector a little bit better. My way of doing things is conversational more so than lecture, and trying to facilitate really good conversation. So that's great when you kind of get into a team or a group, and you discover little barriers that are holding them back, and you try and unlock those, or delve a little bit deeper into them, it's always different. There's no conversation or keynote or Q&A or workshop that's the same, because you're dealing with different people at different time in their lives, and that's really rewarding and really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And just picking up on that point there about, you're in and out of lots of organizations at the moment. You're also engaging in the coaching world and pundits. But do you see particular challenges that are common to both worlds, or things that are live in people's worlds right now as challenges they're looking to address?
Yeah, look, I think the biggest one that well, obviously in the tech world, there's a huge amount of uncertainty and a lot of redundancies and fear for the employees of stability and security, and does the company value them? Is their role one of those roles that's going to be up for review? And that can often look at loads of teams, loads of companies, organizations. They think the culture is great because they're on a they're swimming with the current. Things are going well, everybody's performing, there's bonuses, there's nice extracurricular activities being put on, but when you really find out your culture is when the pressure comes, when that crisis happens, and in the tech world at the moment that's happening. So I think companies are very conscious of how the employees feel, and is there that fear, and can you still perform under that fear? Because what can sometimes happen is, because you start to stress and worry about your security, and that's all natural, there's nothing wrong with that, your performance drops, right? Your performance drops because you get distracted, and then that can actually lead to you maybe being one of those roles, or one of those people that are in a spotlight for retention. And again, it sounds so cheesy, but from a sporting point of view, the analogy is, trust the process, look after your own job, do your job well, and the stuff outside your control is outside your control. But sometimes I think people get distracted by that, by the outside noise, which it's not easy. And then the other thing is, I suppose, this reintegration of being in the office, or that's what's the perfect balance? What's the Goldilocks porridge temperature of being in the office, being out of the office? Can we work? Can we be productive? Can we perform in that hybrid environment well? How do we work? How do we communicate? How do we organize ourselves best to maximize that? Can we work better virtually? Can we get more out of that virtually? So they're the things that I think are topical at the moment. And even though this hybrid environment is not new now, we're still trying to. I think everyone's trying to find the right balance for their organization, and more importantly, the people in it, the people in your team, and what they want, and how you can best facilitate them, because that's the leaders. That's what they have to do. They have to just try and understand the needs and wants and desires and complications that the team have individually, and then try and find the best way of facilitating that.
Yeah, fantastic. I've only a couple more questions to ask you, as I know you're on the clock, and push for time. But we often talk in below the line, like our strap line is this idea of live well and perform better. And we always say to people, it's one of the questions we always ask the guests on the podcast, because we don't have a fixed definition of what that is. But I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what's your take on that as a strap line, and what does it mean to you?
For me, it's to have habits and rituals, to be honest. So for example, like I don't get a huge amount of time at home, but we try every Sunday evening to go for dinner as a family in a gastropub around a corner. And it sounds so silly, but it kind of, when I was a kid, we used to always do Sunday lunch, because my dad worked 6 days a week, but we used to always do a Sunday lunch somewhere. We went to a hotel or whatever, and it's a little ritual that I think wraps up the week for us nicely and starts the week off. And the kids are disappointed if for whatever reason we don't do it, and it sounds crazy, because we obviously we live together, but I have two teenagers, but we're like shifts passing in the night sometimes, and we don't actually, sometimes even at breakfast it's sometimes rushed. It's kind of that 2 hours on a Sunday evening where you actually kind of find out how their week has gone, and just how their life is going. You know what I mean? And it sounds like that. It's not a key to performance, but for me, it's just one little habit or ritual I have and we have as a family that kind of keeps us in sync. I try and listen to podcasts. I try and get out for a walk with a dog, and I enjoy that. I come back with a clearer head. When I do a talk or when I do a workshop, I'm big on doing a hot debrief. So as soon as I get into the car, I'll take notes around, like, did things happen in that call or that meeting that I planned for? Had I done enough background research? Had I asked the right questions of the person who booked me? Did I really understand what they wanted out of it? Did I deliver what they asked me to deliver? Did I react as well as I could have to a certain question which was left field? Was I succinct? And I'm not being succinct here, but was I accurate or precise in the feedback or the response I gave? Could I handle it better? And then obviously, normally I'm driving home, and then I kind of I go a little bit further on those things, but I write them down. And I try and then use that as a way of learning. So, like, I'm lucky. I'm friends with a very good surgeon, Gary O'Toole, and orthopedic surgeon, swam for Ireland as well. So he's got a sporting background. But he was telling me about the kind of pre-mortem and post-mortem or pre-op meetings that happen for something that's, he's got a big operation on a Friday. It's something he hasn't seen a huge amount of. They'll get on a phone with colleagues or in America or England, and they'll try and predict, what they're going to face and have a plan in place. And obviously the ideal scenario is, everything goes to plan, but sometimes things change, and they'll do a debrief afterwards and question their communication, question their pre-op meeting. Could they've seen what happened? So I love that. I love this. But then also, Leinster uses this thing called sumo, which is shut up, move on. So there's a book about it, but basically that, you have a very aggressive attitude towards learning from an incident or a meeting or a sales call or whatever it is, or a match if it's sport. And then you take on board those things and then you move on. You know what I mean? You take on board, you don't just go into the next match or operation or sales call beating yourself up about something you didn't do well previously. You accept that and you realize you're human. The elite performers do that review part well, and then they go and do it again and try and do it better. You know what I mean? So that's kind of, they're the things that I think I'm pretty okay at, and help me kind of move along.
Yeah, wonderful. Two more questions before we go. But my only really rugby related question. It's World Cup year, so I can't go without asking you. Do you think Ireland can break their World Cup hoodoo?
Yeah, I think we're in a really good place. I think we're very reliant on Johnny Sexton still, but Farrell has done an incredible job, and also it's way more player led than it was under Schmidt. So the responsibility is shared. Farrell is a transformation leader, so he makes other people leaders, without like shifting the responsibility. The responsibility is still to him, but he empowers the players and his coaches to deliver. So I think I think that the pressure of not performing at previous World Cups probably led to the last team not performing at a World Cup. But I think that they're in a much better place now from a psychological point of view, and it's going to be very tough. It's very open at the moment, but I believe in this team and I believe in this coaching.
Brilliant. And then lastly, just before we go, I know we mentioned that we connected on LinkedIn, so obviously anyone listening to this can probably reach out to you on LinkedIn as well. But if anyone wants to talk to you about getting you in to speak or do something with their team, with their organization, where do they find you? Or what's the best place to contact you?
Yeah, I'm on nearly all social media except Tinder. So LinkedIn is perfect. I'm building a website at the moment. Should be ready next week. Twitter, direct message to Twitter, Facebook, whatever. But yeah, LinkedIn would be great. But I'm easily contactable.
Yeah, Bernard, thanks a million for giving me your time. Your passion and your enthusiasm for what you do and what you're doing is really palpable, and there's been some real gold nuggets and gems in there for anyone listening to this. So thanks very, very much for doing it.
No, my pleasure, and yeah, I've listened to quite a few of your pods, and I've picked up some nice bits on them as well. So continue success, and I'm sure we'll bump into each other at an event in person soon.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's conversation. We hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard and you want to stay in touch with us, then please head over to www.belowtheline.ie to subscribe to our mailing list and to explore our upcoming programmes and events. Until then, take care and see you next time.